Hello, Changemaker.
Welcome to the Innovation Room.
A place for business leaders,
Change agents and change champions.
anyone who wants to know where digital transformation is taking us,
A place that sparks ideas.
and explores what's really possible with software and technology.
Ready?
Let's see what's happening.
Hello there, fellow changemakers. As the ground beneath our feet shifts faster than ever before, businesses are quickly and rudely becoming aware of the need for a spry strategy. When I first met our guest, Dr. John Blakey, who is the founder of the Trusted Executive, I knew that his 9 habits for leaders who inspire results, relationships, and reputation is one that changemakers would not want to miss. Dr. John will unveil his secret ingredient, trust in leadership, that can supercharge business. We'll dive into the 9 habits and the 3 pillars of trustworthiness and explore the importance of consistency amidst chaos in a business. We'll provoke thoughts of the delicate balance between vulnerability in leadership and Dr. John's surprising discovery about benevolence in the trustworthy formula. Get ready for an eye-opening chat that will hopefully help you embrace change, navigate complexities, and take your business to the next level. I'm Lindsay Jessup, COO at Geeks, and let's just dive in. John, thank you for joining us in the Innovation Room. Really excited to have you here. I was really motivated and inspired from your work with our CEO group, and I really would love to share that with the world because of how important it is. And I noticed actually, oh look, your book just happens to be right there. So perhaps you could share a little bit with our audience about who you are and what the Trusted Executive is.
Yeah, so John Blakey, Dr. John Blakey, no less. Spent 6 years at Aston Business School researching trust, and in 2016 published the book, The Trusted Executive, which you kindly referenced. So my passion is creating a new standard of leadership defined by trustworthiness. And that was the focus of the research at Aston. It's also the focus of the Trusted Executive, which is a leadership development consultancy that I founded in 2016. So we exist to help leaders who share that belief, share that passion, and want to go the next step with building high trust cultures. So that's a bit of what I'm up to. I guess that trust throughout my career has always been a theme, but I didn't realize it and make it as conscious and as focused as this until, the last 6-7 years of really putting this out there and building a tribe of leaders who are committed to leading with the power of trust.
Yeah, I really am excited to unpack that a little bit today. Before we get into it, though, one of the things that we love to do in the Innovation Room, to put you on the spot a little bit, is to say that if you could choose someone, alive or dead, to be in an innovation room with you, the best ideation and creative processes happen here, who would you choose and why?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me this question, and it has put me on the spot a bit. And I'm thinking about my own model of trust, and in the model of trust, it says, be honest, be open, be brave. Are three of the 9 habits. So I'm gonna step out there a little bit because the person I would have here would be Jesus. I am a Christian, and if I could have anybody in the innovation room, I would have the man himself.
And the beautiful thing about the innovation room is you should be open. For innovation to be successful, you need to be open, you need to be humble. And I see so much overlap between your model and what needs to happen for an innovation culture to thrive as well. So what I love is that the people that we have in the innovation room, when they say who they would bring, it's always so different. And I can imagine, I would love to do a podcast almost and bring all of these people that they say they would bring into the innovation room and just imagine what we would create. So without further ado then, could you maybe start to, I'd like to learn a bit more about some of the key principles in the Trusted Executive. And I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in my translation, but you speak about 3 pillars, so ability, benevolence, and integrity. And I understand that being, some of the foundational aspects of building a trustworthy culture. Could you explain that and maybe expand on the 9 habits a little as well?
Yeah, sure. So when I started my research at Aston, there had already been a lot of research done on trust over the last 30 years. And this formula for trust has been out there for a long time, but I think many practicing leaders have not necessarily come across it. And the formula is trustworthiness, your team's trustworthiness, your brand's trustworthiness can be measured by ability times integrity times benevolence. And when I first came across that formula myself, the first two pillars, ability and integrity, were not new. I've always known that you need to be competent at what you do to be trusted. Integrity, yes, I've known that, it's important to have your values, your ethics, to walk the talk. But this third word, benevolence, was a surprise to me. I think I mentioned when we did the workshop that I've never been on the course, the Introduction to Benevolence course for senior leaders. It's not a word that's been in many leadership competency frameworks that I've come across over the last 30 years. So that intrigued me. And benevolence is from the Latin words benevolent. It means wishing well. It's wishing well for others, common human care, compassion, kindness. So that's the sort of new kid on the block for me. I think many people have been familiar with ability and integrity, but benevolence is different. But I think benevolence is something that people in the modern workforce are expecting to experience more of. And I think leaders that really anticipate that and really get into the upper quartile on ability and integrity and benevolence will create a competitive advantage around trust. So that's that formula: ability, integrity, benevolence. It's important that people remember it's a multiplier. It's not ability, add integrity, add benevolence. It is a multiplier. And of course, one of the risks of that is that if you score 0 on any one pillar, you will not be trusted, because anything times 0 is 0. So it highlights how broad this topic of trust is. It's not just about keeping your promises. It's not just about caring for other people. It's not just about being honest. It's quite a collection of things that a leader will need to focus on if they want that reputation as the trusted one.
And you prompted something, which is making me think about a series. I'm not sure if you know Lazar Dominic, but he did a series on Digital is from Venus, and his view on the digital world and the way business is changing was that there's a lot of traits that tend to be, psychological characteristics and traits that tend to be seen as more feminine characteristics that need to be explored more in business. And I wonder how much of that could be linked to the benevolence pillar as well. If you think that there's any synergy there, what would you have to say on that?
Yeah, I've been asked this question many times about, the mapping of the habits and these 3 pillars and the 9 habits of trust to gender, but also to cultures. Different cultures can be stronger and more natural at some habits than others. And I haven't done the science behind this, but I think, yes, you can sort of see there are certain habits which we would be more natural at because of our conditioning, because of the way we've been brought up, the way we've been taught, the role models that we were presented with. And so I think that if you're a woman and you're wanting to build trust, you've maybe had certain ways of doing that. If you're a man, you've got certain ways of doing that. If you're from the US, you've got slightly different ways of doing it to if you're someone in Malaysia. So I think there are different emphases that we will come to this model with. And what I always say with the 9 habits of trust when we're working with it with leaders is no one's going to be a 10 out of 10 on all 9 habits. The key is to identify the one that you could improve that would have the most impact on your leadership and your business. So none of us are going to be perfect at this, but we can all improve. And certainly there'll be the benevolence aspect, I think, is typically seen as a more feminine attribute. But equally, there are some incredibly kind men out there as well. Mm-hmm. And, so I think it's definitely there's some trends and patterns there.
Absolutely. The other point that you mentioned that stood out to me was highlighting that it's a multiplier effect. So if you do not deliver or convey an ability, benevolence, or integrity, then you do not have trust. And that's really interesting to me, because I guess I want to put a question to you then. Do you think that in a creative or innovative space that you could have innovation without trust?
Well, the science would say no. The science says that high trust environments, safe spaces, encourage risk taking, and risk taking is key to innovation. You mentioned it earlier about, to innovate, we need to experiment, we need to be prepared to fail and get things wrong, and therefore we need to know that it's a safe space in which to do that. The safer that space can be, the more we will express what is deep inside of us, which could then trigger creativity and innovation. So that question you asked at the start of the podcast about who would you bring into the room? Well, it depends how safe it is. So if the room's safe, you'll bring someone different than if you felt it wasn't safe and you'd be a bit more guarded. So I think trust and psychological safety are very close cousins. If you've got a psychologically safe space, it will be a high trust space. And that typically means people will take more risk. And if people take more risk, they're going to innovate, they're going to be creative. And there are a number of research studies that will show the impact of trust on creativity and innovation and put numbers to that. So yes, if you're looking to foster innovation, trust is definitely one of the ingredients that I would encourage people to focus on.
We take our clients on a digital evolution journey, and the pace at which technology is changing right now is exponential. Even in the last few months, we've seen huge changes in the technology space, which is really exciting, really exciting. But it can be scary for some as well. So we are collaborating with our clients and helping them create a vision and a spry strategy that enables them to handle this, and also what we refer to as liminal spaces culture, to be able to handle the chaos that comes with strategies needing to adapt so quickly. Because, just in the span of the last few weeks, I've seen businesses whose business plans just had to be balled up and thrown out the window because of the introduction of OpenAI and the way it's integrating into businesses now. So I'd be really keen to maybe explore your 9 habits and trust, because I think this is really fundamental. I don't think I hypothesize, and I think it's supported by science, as you just alluded to, that you cannot thrive as a leadership or as an executive team, and you cannot have a business that can sustain a digital evolution life cycle if you do not have trust. And what I thought was really exciting was exploring those 9 habits, because I actually think your 9 habits of trust could really nurture that. So could you maybe bring that to the light for our audience?
Yeah, if people have got the 3 pillars, so ability, integrity, benevolence, the easiest way to think about the 9 habits is to split them into groups of 3. So 3 habits of ability, 3 habits of integrity, 3 habits of benevolence. If we start with ability, then the 3 habits of ability are deliver, coach, be consistent. And often when I talk about the habits of trust, I contrast them with the habits of power, because I think we come from a history in organizational life of a power-based leadership currency. And I think that is increasingly fragile, increasingly hard to sustain in a modern world. And therefore, we're all, I think, navigating from the habits of power to the habits of trust. So when you think about those 3 habits, deliver, coach, be consistent. In the power world, yes, we knew we needed to deliver. So I don't think that's changed. But in the power world, we tended to tell people as bosses what to do rather than coach people as leaders how to perform. So I think the shift there is from telling to coaching, and coaching is a key habit of trust. The 3rd habit, consistency. In the power world, if it's a fear-based culture, then unpredictability comes with it. but nothing destroys trust as quickly as unpredictability of behavior. So if I'm going to trust you, I need to know where I stand in relation to you. And that means that I'm looking for consistency of behavioral response on a good day, on a bad day, high stress, low stress. I'm looking to get a consistent response from the leader, because then I'll feel safe, and then I won't close down when I get that, unpredictable reaction. So those are the 3 habits of ability: deliver, coach, be consistent. Before we go into the integrity habits, Lindsay, I just wonder if you've got any thoughts on those 3, and then we'll take them sort of 3 at a time, because it can be quite a lot for people to remember in one go.
So one question I might have based on that is, in a world where, so historically, strategy, for example, was something that you think doesn't change that often in business, right? You have a business plan, you have a strategy, and it might need to change every year, every 2 years, depends on how often the landscape of the world, and it might be enriched or updated, but fundamentally changing the way it is, it doesn't happen that much. Now, and in innovation as well, if you think about that aspect, a lot of the time you're doing something and it might fail and you need to do something else, or be willing to just walk away from something that you put a lot of effort in. And one day you might think it's a good idea, and the next day it might not be such a good idea for various reasons. Now, a lot of, from an outside looking in, to me, that is a challenge with consistency, because you might be moving in one direction the next one day and then need to go the other. So how do you think that you can be a consistent leader in an environment that might change very frequently?
So it's a great question, and it's important to clarify on that habit. So we're talking here about consistency of behavioral response of the leader. So we're not saying that everything needs to stay the same. We're not saying that we don't need to be agile to respond to a very rapidly changing environment, but it's more that when that change happens, how does the leader respond? So stress is an interesting sort of example, that under stress people can behave differently. And if the environment's changing very quickly around us, it can create a feeling of stress. Now, if I'm stressed, you will experience me showing up differently. I'm likely to be irritable, and maybe I'm going to be jumping to conclusions. I'm going to be more fight or flight in my responses. That's the sort of consistency we're talking about. We're saying that trusted leaders stay calm through that period of change and innovation, that when they fail, and when other people fail, it doesn't rock them to the extent that they suddenly appear to be a different person and they start behaving unusually or out of character. So really that consistency is about your character and how stable your character is amongst a world that is changing and amongst business successes and failures. And, do these things go to your head and change you? Or are you someone who can maintain that calm, measured presence amongst all this turmoil, amongst all this chaos? That's the sort of consistency that we're looking to talk about in terms of trust.
We talk about helping people flex their change muscles. And I think that is one of the habits that, if leaders get it right, could really help a team, help as a leadership team navigate and exemplify what good looks like in terms of flexing the change muscles. Do you have any top tips on how to do that?
When I think about this habit consistency and how to improve with that, I do think a lot about stress levels and resilience. And I think that my consistency, for example, I know is helped when I'm working on having a balanced and doing those things that I know keep me calm. So I know that, for example, exercise, listening to music, there are certain things that I know I need to have a certain amount of in my life if I'm going to maintain that consistent, calm presence. And I know that if I don't keep that balance, then that's when I'm most likely to be stressed and therefore at risk of behaving unpredictably. So I think the top tip around consistency is just encouraging everyone to become aware of their stress levels, and to know what it is that they need to do or be in order to reduce that stress. And it could be simple things. We've all sort of read those books and been on those courses, but I think it's just reminding yourself all the time, what are the things that keep me in a good space? And how can I make sure that I prioritize those things? And I see that as part of my responsibility as a leader, to prioritize those things. They're not distractions from my job, that they are a core part of my job if I want to be a high trust leader.
All right, can we explore the other pillars now? I'm excited.
Yeah, so integrity is the second pillar, 3 habits of integrity. And the 3 habits of integrity that came out of the research are: be honest, be open, be humble. So I think honesty is something most people think of pretty quickly when we talk about trust. Probably the difference these days around honesty is that because we live in a highly transparent world, we're all one click away from exposure. Then the bar on honesty, I think, is ruthlessly high. We are, as leaders, under scrutiny. There are expectations, and we are being watched. So I think it means that we have to pay attention to that honesty, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Be open. Being open is linked to this word vulnerability, that high trust leaders are willing to make themselves vulnerable in the right way at the right time. So Brené Brown is one of the inspirations in her work around vulnerability. And she said about vulnerability is the first thing I want to see in you, and it's the last thing I want you to see in me. That's typically been the traditional approach to vulnerability. I love it when you do it, but I'd rather you go first. Well, leaders go first with vulnerability, and I think as leaders today, we have to embrace the idea that yes, we do make mistakes, yes, we do have good days and bad days, and talking about those things in the right way at the right time in our teams inspires trust, because people want to work for human beings. They don't believe anymore in this all-powerful, invincible, often male leader. It's a stereotype that is, from my point of view, a busted flush. And we want to work for human beings, and human beings are fallible. So, we're going to want to see that expressed at some time in that leadership relationship. And then be humble. The opposite of being humble is to be arrogant. I think in the power-based world, if you were successful enough, then you could get away with being arrogant. We might not have liked it, but it sort of at times came with the package, and we tolerated it. I think in the trust world, we don't care how successful you've been. We want you to be on a level with us. We want you to have that eye-to-eye conversation that still gives us that impression that you're learning, that you're open-minded, and that you don't feel that you've got it all sussed, just because you might have been successful in a particular way at a particular time. So I think that humility and being humble is part of integrity. It's part of that oneness that comes with integrity. So be honest, be open, be humble are the 3 habits of integrity.
I really resonate with a lot of the things that you're speaking about there. In particular, you said leaders, I think you said, correct me if I'm misquoting, but leaders go first with vulnerability.
Yeah.
Leaders lead first with vulnerability. And it's interesting. I think that's a difficult one for a lot of people. They're willing to do it often if someone goes first, as you said, but it's a really, really challenging thing. And to do it and I guess wield that in a safe way, in the right way is a challenge, I'm sure, for many business leaders. But when it's done well, the impact on the followership I've seen is incredible. in particular, in some of our best clients that I've worked with, one of the things that I'm always in awe of is when there is a big challenge technically, for example, or when they needed to pivot in the way of their digital transformation, the way they went to the team and were open and just said, look, this didn't work, this is what we're going to do. And the most powerful thing I've heard them say is, this was my mistake. That I think made people feel very safe. But if I were to take it the other way, could you be too vulnerable as a leader? Is it safe to actually say, I made a mistake? Or could you lose trust if you do that? Is that really the way to go if you think of it from the more black hat side?
Yeah, I think this is where it's powerful to remember that there are 9 habits of trust, and the habits sometimes are intention. So the first habit we talked about was deliver. So I need to deliver to be trusted. So how do I combine that with also making mistakes and being humble and being open about that? So there is a tension between the habits. And I think the key is to not overplay any particular habit and not underplay any particular habit. So yes, as a leader, to be trusted, I don't want to be apologizing for mistakes all the time. I also want to be celebrating moments of success when I and we have delivered and mastered that habit number 1. So I think there's a dance going on here between the habits where they come and they take center ground and then they retreat and another habit takes center ground. And if you remember that formula at the beginning, ability times integrity times benevolence, and we said don't score 0 on any one pillar, don't score 0 on any one habit, but equally don't become a black belt at 4 of the habits and leave 5 of them completely untouched. So I think we probably all know. I mean, it's interesting example. Like I could think of an example, a celebrity example, Steve Jobs. If we looked at Steve Jobs in relation to the 9 habits.
John, could you kindly also explain for us the 3 habits under the benevolence pillar?
Yeah, so I talked about benevolence being the new kid on the block. So these habits might feel a little bit different. So the 3 habits of benevolence are evangelize, be brave, be kind. So let's take that word evangelize first. An unusual word, maybe to many of our listeners, often talked about as a religious word, but evangelize at its core means spread the good news. And great trusted leaders spread the good news about their business, their mission, their vision. And they're passionate and excited about that in a way that is contagious and gets other people to follow them to the promised land. So that's what great evangelists do. Be brave. We're not talking about the personal, physical bravery of the world of power. We're talking about the moral bravery of the world of trust. So the idea that at some point in the cycle, the leader self-sacrifices for the mission, for the bigger good. Doesn't happen often in my experience of business, but when it does, boy, does it inspire trust. And it's part of that benevolence, that taking care of people, that willingness to put others' needs ahead of our own. And then the last habit, kindness. What has kindness got to do with leadership? Well, it turns out that kindness is one of the 9 habits of trust, and trust is the one thing that changes everything. So kindness is not just about being a good human being, it's about being a great leader. And what I love to say to people when I talk about this work is that as the boss, as the chief executive, as the leader, you get to make someone's day every day. What a great job that is. And you do it by the tiny noticeable things, the random acts of kindness that make someone feel special. And that's that purple dye of kindness, as I call it, that all it takes is one drop and it changes the whole complexion of a conversation or of a meeting or of a culture. So those are the 3 habits of benevolence. I could think of an example, a celebrity example, Steve Jobs. If we looked at Steve Jobs in relation to the 9 habits. Steve Jobs, master evangelist, he had this like reality distortion field around him, such that anybody who came within 20 yards of him started thinking about the world the same as he did. I mean, that is just amazing evangelical sort of skill of inspiring people and persuading people and exciting them to follow you. But equally, we know from the accounts of Steve Jobs that if you were close to him, he wasn't the kindest of people. We have now in the film of Steve Jobs, we have him presented as quite a cruel character. And so that's another of the habits of trust, and so you can be fantastic at one thing, but if you've got a blind spot somewhere else, then unfortunately that can undo a lot of great work. And again, 20 years ago, we probably would have never known that about Steve Jobs, and we might not have even cared about it. But these days, we do want to know about people and leaders and their full lives and their personal lives. And we do want to know if they're cruel or kind, as well as brilliant inventors and innovators, So it's a complex dance of trust. And I think as leaders, we just need to be very aware and keep checking in around these habits, make sure that we're maintaining that balanced approach.
It's really interesting, and I love the Steve Jobs example, because especially in my world, obviously he's quite a topical figure, and I completely, the phrase, you've probably heard it before, culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'm not sure if you've heard that before. And you kind of can't have one without the other, of course. But what I'm hearing is really to trust, and having a high trust culture is key in executive leadership, and especially in our world of the fast-paced transformation, and it's interesting to build a high trust culture and navigate and have an agile strategy. You think that when you start talking about the benevolence, so you have the aspect of really evangelizing, getting everyone behind the vision and the strategy. But if you're not leading by example with integrity, then you can't really have either. So it sounds like leadership teams have their work cut out for them, making sure that they're bringing the right team on board to navigate this.
It's hard work, Lindsay. Two things that came out of the research that might be worth sharing on that topic is that what came out of the research was the biggest single factor in creating a high trust culture is the behavior of the CEO and the senior leadership team. So that role modeling, that leading by example, getting it right at the top is critical to then cascading that into a culture. And then the other piece that came out of the research was that typically on average, CEOs rate themselves 29% more trustworthy than do the people that they lead. So I call that the authenticity gap, that there's a 29% gap between how I view myself and how others view me in relation to trust. Typically, we are overestimating how much we are trusted. And I find that quite an intriguing challenge, because how do you work on something if you don't know that you need to work on it? And this is where a lot of our work with the trusted executive is measurement, is using this model to help measure trust, because what gets measured is treasured. Until you actually get the data, then how do you know what the gap is, and how can you work on closing that gap and then demonstrating to others that you have done that work. So yeah, it's hard. It's a tough job for leaders and their teams in the current world to build this trust, but the prize is also a big prize, and those that do the work have got much more of a chance of winning the prize.
You kind of answered the question that came to mind, and it's a very obvious question, but it's maybe we can build a bit more on it. But reality and perception, that 29% gap, that's a big gap. It's not a small gap. How measuring, obviously, is one thing that I took from that, but how really can leaders look to close that gap?
Yeah, it's it starts with data. Are you getting good data? Are you benchmarking and sense checking your view of the world with other people? And that can start informally. So when we did the workshop with you and your colleagues and the CEO group, you did an exercise together to self-assess against the 9 habits, and then you talked together about that, and you got other people's perspectives, and immediately we're starting to get the conversation going. The best thing about this model, I would hope, is that it helps us have better conversations about trust, and better conversations are key to building awareness with leaders around where their strengths are and where their areas for development are, and trying to make that not a personal attack, like I don't trust you, but actually an open conversation using an independent model that allows us to talk about 9 habits, which none of us are going to be 10 out of 10 on all those habits. So I think the key is about getting feedback. Measurement can be part of that. If we want to get more scientific, we can put numbers to things, and we can survey populations and gather more feedback, or we can just have informal conversations with our team and our peers and give them permission to give us feedback. But I think it's hard to see how we go further on this journey without getting better feedback, better data.
So I think we're very clear that trust plays a huge success in business, and as you said, the prize is great if you get it right as a company. You're all going to win together. But what can leaders do actively to cultivate a culture of trust?
The good news, that answer is that if you work on these habits, what the research says is that role model and that leading by example is a hugely powerful lever of change. And so I think that is an opportunity that this is something in your control. It's about your behavior. So you can work on it, you can develop it. Like all habits, it takes time, it's hard work. But if you're focused and motivated, this is within your gift to build your trustworthiness. So that's the opportunity, I think. Equally, it's a responsibility, isn't it? Because we're basically saying that your behavior matters. And therefore, it comes with a responsibility that the little things matter. I interviewed the chief executive of the Co-op bank as part of the research. And I remember him saying to me that, when he walked into reception of their London offices, if there was a piece of litter on the floor, he would always make sure that he picked it up and put it in the bin, because he knew that people were watching. And he knew that if he did that 5 days in a row, then other people who walked into that building were going to start doing it as well. And it works the other way around, doesn't it? That if he didn't pick it up 5 days in a row, then nobody else would pick it up either. So our behavior matters. That's both an opportunity because we're in control of our behavior most of the time, but equally it's a responsibility that you can't not set an example. You are setting an example, and then the question is, am I setting an example around these 9 habits? So it does start with us, and then with that leadership team, the tone at the top. If we can get that moving in the right direction, we will find that other people follow, and that's a sustainable model of change, rather than thinking that you need to organize some huge training program for everybody in the business. I think leadership can set that example, and it can cascade quite naturally and be more sustainable on that basis.
Parting words. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience, or any other wisdom around the trusted executive?
Well, the phrase I haven't used, which I always use, Lindsay, so I feel obliged almost to use it as we're closing now, is my favorite quote on trust by an author called Charles Green. And what Charles Green said was, do you believe that what the world needs right now are leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than leaders who trust in power? I wish I'd thought of that quote myself, because I think it's absolutely brilliant, because I do think it captures the shift that is going on in the modern world. I do think we are pivoting from power to trust. I think that's hugely exciting, but it also means that we have to reapply for our own jobs. Most of us were brought up in a world of power. We've learned the habits of power. And for most of us, it requires a conscious shift and effort to really build these habits of trust. So if you want to be one of those leaders, then I think that's an exciting journey. And I hope that the 9 Habits of Trust and this work, is one piece of the jigsaw that might help you take the next step.
Since my first session with you, I think I've been quite humbled by even thinking about that gap and what do I perceive versus what is the reality. Where can we find you if anyone wants to reach out and learn more about the Trust Executive and your leadership?
You can find me on Amazon or bookshop of your choice. You can find me on podcast. So there's a podcast that features each of the 9 habits. So people are fans of podcasts, and there's a way of finding out more there. And there's a website, www.trustedexecutive.com, which talks a lot more about the work that we do with leaders and organizations and how we take them on this journey of trust, which has different stages, but helps build that capability over a period of time. So I think those are the 3 ways to dig a bit deeper if people want to: the book, the podcast, and the website.
Well, thank you so much for joining us in the Innovation Room.
Thank you, Lindsay. Been great to be part of it.
Thanks for joining us in the Innovation Room.
We hope it sparks some ideas.
Want to learn more about what we do?
Maybe you could even be our next guest.
And spark some ideas yourself.
Find us at Geeks Limited.
And join us again soon.
Because real change never stops.